Hi, my name is Nikki, and this is The Interventionalist. Okay, so today I want to talk about something that has been on my mind a lot these past couple months, but with everything going on in the world within the past month or so, the past few weeks, this thing that's been in my head has just been sort of snowballing more and more, and I just feel like I need to talk about it. And that's the idea of ethics applied to forgiveness, or ethics in forgiveness, which I know sounds kind of ridiculous, like when you talk about them in the same breath, like as if they can be applied, like ethics could be applied to forgiveness, because forgiveness is such a subjective thing. It is a subjective thing that trying to apply like an objective form of ethics to it seems sort of silly. And in some ways it definitely is, but I think we live in a world where objectivity being applied to forgiveness in terms of ethics we need it. The world is causing so much pain. And when I say the world, I guess it's kind of an all-encompassing term for like the groups in the world, like the governments in the world, and even just like personal interactions, on a grand scheme and on a more personal scheme. There is so much pain in the world that we cause each other. And I think as we go through life, we will need forgiveness just as much as we will need to give it. It's a two-way street, I think, throughout our whole life. But there are some things in the world that are just so heinous that are arguably completely unforgivable. But the problem is the world doesn't stop. And if the world doesn't stop, and we want to progress as a not like a society, but as a people, and there needs to be a way for those who have been so wronged to to receive that forgiveness that they are owed, that they are deserved. And when I think about ethics applied to it, it's like, why is this happening? And then what are like the ethical, objective ways that the world can kind of move forward and implement empathy and make the things that are like rules and laws built, like born from empathy. And you can't make people empathetic, and that's what I think drives so many of us crazy. It's the idea that no matter what you say or what you do, there are some people in the world that you can't teach empathy to, or sympathy, or you can't teach people to care. And that's one of the most frustrating things to experience, and also just the most damaging to watch, is to watch people who don't have this empathy, this basic human empathy. Like, you just shouldn't have to teach people to care about other people. And what's going on in the world is it's just like that idea personified, is that there's millions of people who are being like, oh my God, there's like not a word, the horrors that are being committed against so many innocent people in the world. And all of these people that are contributing to it, how do they not see what they're doing? You know what I mean? Or like, how do they not feel it? And like, the idea, I guess, that comes to my mind is like, there's only so much that we can accomplish with feeling, and then there's so much that needs to be accomplished through almost like purely objective logic and structure. And like, can the two ever interact, But I feel like everything needs to be based out of empathy and assessed from there. And so I guess when I'm thinking about this, it's like, why do these things happen? Like, what is causing these things to happen? And there's so many ethical theories, like in philosophy. I studied philosophy. That's why like this comes to mind. There's all these ethical theories in philosophy, and it's like trying to rationalize why people are committing the acts that they commit. And then also trying to rationalize, like, as a world, what, like, in an ethical, like, structural sense would be needed to try to move forward in any capacity and to do it in the right way. And so when I think about what's happening in the world, like what's happening in the war between Palestine and Israel, that's been happening for ages now, and there has been so much suffering, like an incomprehensible amount of suffering. Like, Palestinian people have endured horrors that are beyond comprehension. Like, I feel like we are given so much information about it, more than any other era, and I feel like to an extent it desensitizes us. And the point isn't that, like, it can, I think in a different conversation can desensitize us, but I guess the point is that there's so much awareness across the world now globally of these horrific things that are happening to people that ages ago, centuries ago, like, the world wouldn't know of unless you were in that particular part of the world. There wasn't that universal sort of connection, and I feel like that's such a blessing today, because we get to be aware of these things and we can be aware of these things, and I feel like that's what allows us to make change and allows us to help more people and to be there for those that otherwise we never could be, even if it's through some kind of power of the internet, you know? It's just forcing, I feel like, or allowing us to create some kind of accountability for systems and institutions and people who have been committing and who continue to commit such heinous, inhumane acts. And there's, like, a benefit to that, but it's also, like, sort of a sense of hopelessness, if that makes sense. Like, it's sort of the idea that there should be accountability and we see what's happening, but how does that happen? Because we're so far removed. I'm, like, straying away from the concept of forgiveness, but something that, like, comes to mind when I think about this stuff is, like, the way that we as a people have become a lot more powerless, and I say that as, like, sort of a general public. And I don't want this to sound, like, hopeless, but it's just, like, it's the idea that when I think institutions were first formed and nations and, like, conglomerations of people, and you could kind of fight back against the leaders of these systems. You know what I mean? Because there wasn't such huge differences in what you could use to fight with. Like, a sword is a sword, or a gun is a gun. And if that's all there is to it, if you have numbers that are sort of comparable and that can go against each other realistically, like, there's a chance for people in everyday life to fight back against people who are at this top and who are making these decisions that are affecting them. It feels like there's more power. I feel like that's kind of the idea of where, in the United States, the right to bear arms comes from, you know? Like, for the people to protect themselves. But we've moved into a world that is so advanced in terms of weaponry, is it weaponry? No, weaponry, nuclear bombs, like, technology, that people at the top of this social hierarchy and who are in politics and in the government, it's like, how do everyday people fight that? And so there has been this sense of powerlessness that I think has just been growing and growing, and what is happening today is such a good example of that, because the world is watching and people are living this reality where it's like, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck? How can this be happening? But also, like, what can we do? Like, what can we do? Seriously, like, what can we do? And I feel like that's where the idea of empathy and forgiveness and these philosophical and these subjective things that are built in emotion that come into play, with kind of the hopes, this sounds so ridiculous, with kind of the hopes that through that it can overpower, or, like, if we can spread it far enough, we can help others, and we can maybe teach others enough, and if there's enough people who feel that same emotional, like, devotion to helping others and to do good, this sense of banding together and maybe being able to make a difference, because we don't have the same kind of power in terms of, like, physical material things. Like, I'm talking about, like, weaponry and stuff like that. But I guess, like, I'm really going off topic because there's just so many things to talk about here, and there's so much pain in the world. And I just, like, you can't rationalize it. There's no reason for it. And obviously, like, you can use these ethical theories, like, they come to mind when I think about this stuff, because it's like, how are they defending this? Like, in their everyday life, like, how are they defending this? And so when you see, like, governments and systems and institutions that are making these decisions that are ruining lives, that are just inhumane, committing like, unforgivable things, and I'm talking about forgiveness, because at the end of the day, I feel like there has to be objectively some way to move on by asking for forgiveness, or by doing things that, like are trying to earn these people's forgiveness that they they have the right to withhold or to give, you know? And it's really weird to put that in the idea of, like, a nation and institutions and then people. Like, just people and communities and stuff like that. But I think about, like, what's causing it, and, like, the idea of applying this then to the people who are the ones who have the right to give this forgiveness. So, like, there's different ethical theories. Ooh, I'm going to, like, start jumping around. Wait, let me write down, like, a couple bullet points so I don't jump around too much. Hold on. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to collect my thoughts. But, like, why we act the ways that we act. And, like, ethics is sort of measuring the nature of the acts and, like, the morality of them. But why do we act the way we act? And there's a lot to be found in, like, the philosophical theories that have developed over time about ethics that I think apply to this. So let's, like, take a look at, like, the more broader ones. So, for example, there's deontological ethics, where it's not the consequence of the action, it's the motivator of the action that determines the morality of it. So I feel like a lot of people in the world, and these people who run institutions that are ruining fucking lives, are just on a more personal level, because this applies at a more grand level, but we can't ignore the more personal level. We can't ignore the more personal, smaller levels of these things. And I say that because whether or not you're drowning at 10 feet or 100 feet or 1,000 feet, you're still drowning, right? So, like, I think it's good to recognize that there are levels to it, to give perspective, and to acknowledge that there's some levels that are more likely and able to get help and hopefully, like, be in a better position to then help those who are further down. And then there's levels that are so far down that they just need everyone's help and they deserve that help. And just recognizing the levels, but not forgetting that each level deserves respect and to be honored and cared, because drowning is drowning, right? But anyways, see, I'm jumping from topic to topic, but in deontological ethics, like, it's the motivator of the action. So these people who commit really heinous acts, who band together and commit heinous acts, that's kind of, I feel like, an idea that drives their actions and what their excuses on a subjective level in terms of, like, being forgiven by the people that they're harming, but not necessarily the people that they're harming are, like, what's the word, like, justifying what they're doing. And, like, if they can justify it in some way, they're like, not as responsible for the pain that it's causing. They lose some accountability. And, like, there can be billions of people in the world who know that they want to hold them accountable, but they're like, but there was a reason. And then there's going to be a billion more who accept that reason, and then there's always going to be this, like, war. Well, I don't want to say always, because I hate the idea of painting a hopeless picture, but that is, like, a reality. And that has been a reality we've lived forever, and as, like, there's global connection, it's just an even greater reality, with stronger consequences, but in larger wars, I think. But it's this idea that, like, this kind of ethical mindset allows people to justify really horrible things, because in wars like there are now, there's such horrific things that can be done to people, and so if they can justify it at all, it's just like, what is too far? And there's war crimes, but I feel like that's become almost nothing to people. Like, it's so bad. And so I think about that and, like, the justification and accountability that comes with that. And then there's other kind of ethical theories that's like, why are these people acting the way that they act, and, like, why there's such this divide, and there's complete misunderstanding, but, like, such devotion to these, like, sort of objective ideas and, like, what makes what you're doing okay, or what's right. So, like, there's also, for example, Kant has a categorical imperative, which is that it's sort of the universal idea of ethics, which is no matter what, something that is wrong is wrong. It doesn't matter why you break the law. Like, in deontological ethics, the motivator is what can make it right. But in Kant's, the motivator doesn't matter. Like, it's always going to be wrong. And the universal aspect comes from how you define what is right and wrong. Is if this action can be applied universally and, like, the world would still be okay, then, like, it's not a morally bad thing. And I'm probably leaving out a lot to these ethical theories, and it's been years since I've really, like, delved into them. But that's kind of the general idea. So there's no prioritizing certain acts over the others unless you want to still admit that it's wrong. Like, as in I say, if your friend is like, do I look bad in this outfit, and you lie and say yes, because why would you want to hurt their feelings over something like this? They're not harming anyone, you're just helping them. But you have to admit that what you're doing is still wrong. There's no justifications. You're not allowed to have those justifications. And if the world operated on this sort of idea, I feel like it would be a very authoritarian world, and that's not a very forgiving way to exist, and the world needs to operate in some capacity in a forgiving way. It has to operate in a forgiving way, because you can't move forward without trying to right the wrongs that have been done to the people that you have hurt. And, like, I wrote a paper about this, like, just, like, a more, like, kind of just, like, emotional aspect, but I think, what I think of forgiveness as is recognizing the wrong and harm that has been done, but deciding to let there be growth beyond it. And the thing is that if we don't recognize the wrongs, like, there's always going to be this anger and this pain, and there will never be growth. There will only be hatred, and rightfully so, from those who have been wronged, and asking them to then be okay and just try and force them to forget so they can just, like, like, that creates a world where you sort of are forcing people to agree to forget what happened so they can just move on, and it's ignoring, like, the emotional aspects of human existence that are objectively real. Like, we know that for a fact. We are not purely logical beings, and none of this shit is logical that's happening. But, like, we are emotional beings, and that has to be recognized in the way that we build the world. So if we live in a world where it's like, just get over it, it's just like generations and generations of pain that is building and building and building, and no recognition for it, and then being shocked that there's this resentment and this hate and this fighting back, right? It's because they're owed that apology, and they're owed like, actions to reflect this asking for forgiveness that these people don't have to give. But that's where ethics is, like, comes into play, because it's like, then it's like, what is a realistic way for the world to move forward if there isn't, like, this exchange of forgiveness or forgiveness given? So it feels like people are put into this position where they're expected no matter what, and looked at and asked, and this happens all the time now, where it's like, well, you have to move on, like, just forgive it and move on, like, it doesn't happen anymore. These bad things aren't happening to this marginalized community anymore, and so forth. And it's like, okay, but what has the world really done to help those on a more emotional and human level versus just, like, a structural level? And to just ask people to forgive and forget for such horrific and horrible things is just never going to be the answer. And the world is just going to continue to go down a path where there's resentment after resentment after resentment. And I feel like we can see that in the world today, and I think that it's not, you can't say that this is a new thing. I think we're just more aware of it because we're more connected, but this has existed since the beginning of time. People have hated each other since the beginning of time. And that's a consequence of being human, is that we will hate things. It's just, a lot of the times, what we see in the world is hate that is irrationally born and cruel in ways that are unimaginable. I really strayed from the ethical aspect of it, but, like, in Kant's way of thinking about it, it'd be like an authoritarian lifestyle, and, like, how the world is then defined is really kind of a dangerous way to think about it, because then who is deciding what is the objective right and wrong? And if it's being decided and built by people who are willing to and believe that they can commit such heinous things, or do such heinous things, what a scary world to live in. But it does create a lot of accountability. And it's just a weird way to think about the world, but there's a lot of people who operate sort of under this idea in themselves. And I think that there's a lot of nations and countries that sort of exemplify this and are a great example, where a lot of, like, I think religiously ruled countries, like, represent this, because they do have, like, a complete guidebook from their religious text to tell them what's right and wrong, so they can create this sort of authoritarian idea where, like, they have something to refer to, they're not building it necessarily, and so they can always refer to it and be like, there's an objective right or wrong that will never be negotiable. And that's a really scary world to live in, because a lot of religion, it can be very deranged and dangerous and just scary, and that's been so evident now and since the beginning of religion. Like, that's very clear, but that's sort of a categorical imperative outlook on the world, and that's been so damaging. Anyways, And then there's things like utilitarianism, and that's like maximize pleasure, minimize pain, like maximize the good in the world for everyone, minimize the bad. And like, how do you define that? Like, is that done at the expense of others? Like, how is that defined? Like, what is doing better for everyone? And I feel like we see this in wars and political decisions being made, and even on like smaller levels, right? Where it's like, well, we're going to sacrifice these people for our greater good, because our greater good is what matters, and it can be only our greater good that we're focused on. We can only care about ourselves or our people. You know what I mean? And we forget that even though we have like these sort of fictitious lines that divide us, we should care about all people. You know what I mean? We've built these ideas that make us hate each other, but at the end of the day, like, we're still people. And so it's sort of picking and choosing who we care about, and to maximize our good, it means to sacrifice other people. And so it's like kind of like the trolley problem in ethics or in philosophy, which is like, if you're in a trolley and it's like going down the track and you have the chance to like, it's going to crash and there's 5 people on the trolley, but if you maneuver it, it's going to hit one person. And so whose life is more valuable? Like, is it okay, or is it right, or moral, even immoral, is still the right thing to do to only hit one person and save 5? But it's kind of the idea that like, this idea of sacrifice is constantly happening and at the expense of others. There's always the sacrifice of other innocent lives being made. Like, it's innocent lives that are the sacrifice for the greater good of just like some other lives. You know what I mean? Like, how do you define the value of like, no innocent person should be spared for the sake of other people's wants? They shouldn't be a means to an end. Like hostage situations and things that are happening, people become a means to an end. It's the most dehumanizing thing that we could do. And if we have no humanity, if we operate in a world that is okay, where it's okay ethically to dehumanize people and to use them as a means to an end, there will be no hope. There's like I can't like imagine a world where like that is the case. Like, there's never going to be like a common enemy. Like, I feel like in a lot of movies and like dystopian movies, like there's a common enemy, right? And like all people need to band together, and it's usually like kind of one enemy. It's like that's kind of the world they build, and it represents sort of this idea. But the problem is there's never going to be one common enemy, and there's never going to be an agreement on who that common enemy is. You know what I mean? Because it's humanity fighting humanity. It's not like humanity fighting like, I don't know, like a giant pack of lions, like where it's like very obviously we're going to pick humanity and we're going to fight against these things and band together, or like fighting a virus, right? And so like humanity is constantly fighting humanity. And where are those lines drawn? And because it's a subjective thing, like ethically, how do you create like objective lines and laws that stop this and that still honor the people and like that have already been wronged so horrifically, and not demand that they move on from it, or that they just like accept that, well, okay, like maybe now we're going to change it and we're just gonna stop treating you this way? That's not enough. And so it kind of creates this idea, at least in my head, where it's like, where do we go? And that's a really sort of, I'm sure to some people they could really like flesh this out and like give ideas and like build plans as much as you can, but I just don't have like, I don't know how to. And how does the world work together where that doesn't sound just like a hopeless, repetitive experience? Oh my gosh, my camera's going to turn off in a second. Hold on. Okay, anyways, there's this idea in philosophy. So, like, how does that not create, like, this sort of hopeless idea for the future that we really can't operate on without, like, I feel like if we operate on a sense of hopelessness, there's nowhere to go. And I feel like we have to try and create a reality where there's somewhere to go. And there's this idea in, I've talked about this in one of my other videos, but Nietzsche, I think it's Nietzsche, has this idea of like eternal recurrence, which is that time is cyclical, but also the world is cyclical, and like the things happening in the world, there's like a fate, and it's cyclical, and it'll keep happening. What has happened will keep happening forever, and that's a really like, I think, easy mindset to fall into, and one that we are sort of seeing happen. Like, I feel like there has really, we see like, wars happen, overcome, and then wars happen and overcome. And we're becoming more and more aware of them. But it has sort of created this idea, which is where I think even Nietzsche can come up with this, which is the world will always repeat the same things, horrific or not. And it'll be horrific followed by some good, horrific followed by some good. And I guess it's like operating in this sense of hopelessness, and like, how do we not feel hopeless? But how do we do that in a way that's not unfairly optimistic to the people that have been wronged, assuming that there's some reality where, like, that can stop happening? And that's where there's another, like, really big, just, like, void level of fear and hopelessness living, which is, like, can we even get to a point in the world where all of the people who feel like this is okay are either gone or have developed a different mindset? And so there's just, like, surrounding bubble of, like, often, like, we can't get out of that way. And it comes back to the idea that, like, we can't force people to care, and that's such a subjective thing, and that's where, like, forgiveness comes in, because you can write ethical, like, all these ethical theories, and you could try and apply them legally where they're objective, but, like, at the end of the day, they're all defined by subjective things, and you can't force people to care. And, like, if those are the people at the top writing these laws, like, and the thing is, like, subjectivity is always going to exist, so, like, how are we going to ever escape that? Like, that is always going to have a voice in the world, and you can't shut that down. And so I think about, there's also egoism. I also want to talk about that, because egoism in terms of ethics is, like, you do what's right for you and only you. So it's kind of like utilitarianism, but it's, like, maximize your pleasure, minimize your pain. And so it's, like, really hedonistic, and in a perfect world, I would like to think that what we believe is best for us is what is also best for others, as in, like, it's, like, helping others, and it's not harming others. And I do think there's always exceptions to that rule. But, like, obviously, like, there's exceptions to that rule in, like, some scenarios, like, people who are, like, want to murder other people and stuff like that. But it's sort of this idea, like, you fend for yourself and you do what's good for yourself, and I feel like that's where this idea of if like, sacrificing other people, like, benefits you, like, you do it no matter what, and, like, it's justifiable because, like, it's you or them, why would you not always pick you? And I feel like there's a healthy way to, like, intertwine these different theories and make them work. Like, that's kind of how the world operates, is, like, we have these, like, objective universal laws, which is, like, don't murder people. And then there's also, like, this, like, there should be a healthy amount of, like, utilitarianism, which is, like, in, like, deontological ethics, which is, like, well, if someone's, like, pointing a gun at you and threatening to murder you, like, if you, this is really dark, I don't know, but you know what I mean, you murder them first, like, is that wrong? And, like, helping others, you know, stuff like that. Except, like, if we take out, like, someone who's, like, planning to kill, like, mass murder people, like, that needs to be, like, healthfully implemented too, like, ethically. And these kind of feel like a lot of different conversations that I'm having with myself, but I guess at the end of the day it doesn't really matter, because this is also just for me to, like, think things through. But we just live in a world where, like, trying to manage existing together and existing in a world where each person has their own sense of humanity and subjectivity, how do we exist together and cooperate without causing each other pain, and without just accepting a world that is completely segregated? You know what I mean? Like, but then how, I guess when I'm talking about forgiveness, then, like, I'm talking about forgiveness, and I thought about this a lot, and now I'm like, I guess I'm kind of losing it, because I've, like, done this, like, going all these other places, but, like, the nature of everything that even led up to me thinking about this was, like, how do, on a human level, like, when I'm talking about this subjective experience, like, our humanity, and moving forward, and, like, having to cooperate with the world, there's going to have to be some objectivity that everyone has to follow to sort of mitigate our subjectivity. And the people who have been so wronged, and just, like, it's so, like, there's no words to explain, like, the incomprehensible wrong that has been done to so many people in the world, and, like, singled out communities and targets, and on their backs, and just all this stuff. Like, how do we move forward in a way that, like, honors and, like, works to actually right the wrongs that have been done, and does it in a way that is actually meaningful and realistic and genuinely helpful, which is like making up for, but not making up for, I guess isn't the right word, but like trying to, in some capacity, as much as they can, repair the damage that has been done, so that, like, as generations go by, it can be sort of, like, phased out and, like, helped. But, like, things are held down generationally, so, like, it can't be, like, one generation of people that are like, oh, we're going to help them as much as we can, and then, like, get over it. Like, you can't operate that way. And then it's, like, this ethical idea, I guess, that comes to my head with the people who are the ones who are expected to forgive, and it's, like, do they also owe the world and themselves, like, to forgive? Like, are they owed? That's not what I mean to say. Are they, like, expected to? They are expected to, but are, like, should they be expected to forgive and forget quicker? I don't think so. But in the nature of thinking about, like, moving forward in the world, this is all assuming that, like, the world actually ever asks for forgiveness and tries to heal the wrongs that have been done, is trying to, like, rectify the things that have been done, what they have done, people have done wrong. It's like this idea where people are like, well, if you can't, like, accept the change that has been made and kind of move on, then what do you expect? Like, we'll never move past this. And it's just completely, like, diminishing and dismissing the humanity of existence in favor of, like, the cooperation of, like, a greater whole, but also just to relieve the guilt and accountability of those who fall under the umbrella of the perpetrators of bad. And it's like this idea that if people aren't forgiving and moving on, and at what pace do they need to forgive and move on for the world to go forward? Like, I don't even know what that means, right? Like, it's this idea that the world can go forward. That's kind of like what people on the other end of the spectrum who are just, like, perpetrators, that's kind of like their mindset, right? And so that puts people who have been so fucking, like, unforgivably harmed in this position where it's like, well, fuck, like, am I ever going to find peace if I don't just, like, forgive and forget, or just repress this and, like, accept that, if I don't try and move on or accept whatever they're offering me as forgiveness, even if it's not at all what is deserved, like, what kind of life does that give them, and what kind of position does that put them in? Like, turns them into, like, kind of, I guess, the villain, or, like, unnecessarily, like, refusing to let the world move on, and, like, then they become the ones in the wrong, even though they are the ones that have been so wronged. It's just this really fucked up and weird cycle to be in, where it's like these two extreme spectrums. Like, what I'm talking about is you can't make people understand and care and understand that pain does not go away, and, like, it takes true actions not only to, like, prove that this won't happen again to horrible people, like, not horrible people, but, like, horrible things won't be done anymore. Like, it's like if someone does something wrong to you, it's not them saying it to you, it's them proving it. They don't act in that horrible way anymore. But at the same time, there's things that are unforgivable. But if, like, you want to move on in the world, like, I guess everything has to be forgivable, whatever. I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought, but it, like, puts the people who deserve the forgiveness in a place where they're supposed to accept, like, the bare minimum of forgiveness. Oh, it ignores their humanity, and it ignores this, like, thing that we know objectively exists, which is humanity and the human experience, and, like, allows people to exist in the world without just, like, I don't know. You have to recognize humanity in people, or we'll never move forward in any capacity, because we don't act completely logically. So if we have been traumatized and we have been hurt, that will affect how we interact with the world and how we exist in the world. So ignoring the emotional impact in someone's humanity after so much, like, incomprehensible harm has been done, all that does is stunt the world even further. And it is not doing what needs to be done, which is genuinely committing the acts necessary and doing the acts necessary to even ask for the forgiveness from the people who have been wronged. Do they have to give it? maybe, like, ethically, like, to move on in some capacity, maybe it feels that way, and there can be, like, that idea, but it still takes genuine action and, like, honoring that aspect of the human experience. And that's a generational thing. Like, I don't even feel like I have to explain that, like, the idea of generational trauma and, like, holding on to that, whether it's, like, in a form of epigenetics, which is, like, your genetics, change based on, like, the trauma that's happened to you, and so it's passed down in different ways, whatever. It's, like, it's the idea of generational trauma, which I don't think there's a lot of research on. But even then, like, people being raised by people who have been really traumatized, like, it takes generations and generations of healing each step at a time to actually reach a place where people can, I think, exist in the world without just harboring so much pain and resentment and fear. Where, like, we can cooperate and we can exist without always being in a fight or flight mode, which is a horrible way to exist, and I think a lot of us exist that way for different reasons, and it can lead to fight, which is, like, destroys the world. And then there's flight, which ignores, like, what has been done to people, like, you run away from it, and then we exist now where, like, people are ignored, and, like, we don't help generationally to try and heal this, and the world just continues to stunt itself. And I guess that's where the idea of eternal recurrence, like, comes into my head, or I guess probably why it's been, like, perpetuated in some capacity, or created by Nietzsche, but it's such a shitty way to think. And I feel like, I hope, because I don't want to think about a reality where that is true, I feel like if the world continues in a way that we have global connection and people being born that are sort of being people being born, I feel like, and we're seeing this, that care about each other and want to help each other, and I think have more empathy because we've built systems where, like, we even have things to, like, encourage that, whether it's, like, therapy or just, like, general, like, what we've always had, which is, like, empathy. Whatever. If, like, there's generations that can be, like, going forward and raised that have this ideology, and I think as more wrong is being done, younger people and, like, people who are witnessing it will hopefully have that idea and, like, want to care and want to change. And if that can grow and get larger and larger, then maybe this idea of this eternal recurrence and what has been right now, the recurrence, like the cycling state, maybe it can stop. But that's where, like, in the beginning of this video, I think I talked about how it comes down to, like, fighting these, like, weird, objective ways that people justify their horrific actions and institutions, and fighting it with our humanity and our empathy, and if you care about people and, like, you can recognize what's being done, that alone is a huge thing. Like, will make a difference in the world because you will act in that way, and that is how we help each other and we heal. And if we can grow in numbers like that, we can band together and make decisions based around that. But there's a lot of people who have grown up in systems and ideas where it didn't matter. It was fun for yourself, and, like, the idea of, like, empathy and caring. We know this, like, going back generations, like, that wasn't really implemented. Like, they didn't care. Like, people didn't really care about each other that way. And not at such, like, a global level, because we didn't have access to so many people on that kind of level. You know what I mean? So it was like, I'll care for my family, but you don't interact with so many people. So you didn't really have to, like, I guess, learn to care about so many people. But that's what I mean. So it's, like, generationally, like, becoming, like, if more generations can come into the world and, like, from the one above them that's starting to develop this more empathetic mindset and this more loving mindset, it can continue to snowball into a world where maybe it'll be just that, and we can continue to teach each other. Younger generations can teach even the older, and older can pass down these, like, budding ideologies of just operating out of love and empathy. And there's a line in Interstellar from the character, Anne Hathaway's character, Brandon, and I remember, like, it stuck with me because they were talking about, like, you've seen Interstellar, like, they're trying to find a planet where, like, people can survive when, like, Earth is ending, whatever. And they're trying to decide between which planet that has the potential to, like, for human life to exist, which one to go to, because they only have, like, the fuel or something to go to one, and it's, like, deciding between the two. And there's people who had gone to each planet that sent data back saying whether or not it was, like, a feasible planet to exist on. I'm really dimming this down, but when they're trying to make this decision, there's three of them, Anne Hathaway's character is the one who's supposed to, like, be the expert on this and make that decision, make that call, and she's saying to go to this one planet, and the guy on that planet is someone she was in love with. She's in love with this person. And so the other two people are like, well, we need to like, consider that, because it could mean you're making the wrong decision just because you're acting out of love and you have this bias, and it could be wrong because of that. And she's like arguing that it's not, because she's not saying this because of that, and like she's operating objectively, but at the same time it's like allowing that humanity to come in, because then she was arguing like, and maybe it is about love, and she's like, but this thing that we don't understand yet, and how much that it can, and how much that matters, like this thing that we don't fully understand and we can't see and we can't access, but it exists and it's real, and maybe we should start considering it more in our decisions than purely just like logical things. Maybe we should trust our humanity and our intuition, especially when it's like out of such incredible blessings of a feeling like love. And I feel like that's such a strong sentiment, and one that, when I was thinking about all of this, is just something that I hope can become a greater ideology. And I feel like I see younger generations having this, and I'm 23, so I think I'm Generation Z, and then there's like another generation below me, and like I see it getting even stronger in them, and I've seen it in my generation, and I see it even less and less in the older ones. And I think part of it comes from a lot of us experiencing older generations who don't have that kind of mindset, but having this global connection, so we can like connect online, and instead of being isolated and sort of accepting it, we can extend empathy to each other. So it's like gives us the ability to sort of not always accept or just live in agreement and be forced to forget the wrong done to us and forgive it immediately, or not even feel like it's something we have to forgive because it wasn't wrong. Like there's no justifications for the way they act, you know. So we have like a global connective source that allows us to like validate each other's feelings and be like, no, like I'm hearing what's happening to you. Like it's no longer something that exists just in their like particular bubble, and it can validate and make other people know and the whole world know that that's wrong. You know, like experiences can extend all throughout the world, and we learn from each other's experiences, and we can justify someone's feelings and recognize when something has been done wrong to them, and when they're being expected to forgive things that are often sometimes unforgivable, or sometimes things in general that are just deserving of forgiveness. And I guess that they operate on a smaller scale and a bigger scale, and like it's like, how do we create peace in the world without forgiving stuff, but like what should be considered when you're expecting people to forgive you, and how does that even come into play, this like subjective, inherently emotional experience, when it's people against nations, or I guess nations in the right, people against institutions and governments. How does that even come to work? And that's where I think like developing generations down the line that have this like empathetic ideology, which I feel like is really growing in numbers, that the people in power, I guess there'll always be like leaders, will operate on this and hopefully actually do the things that are, I guess, like asking for forgiveness from those that have been so wronged, even if it wasn't in their generation, like honoring that it happened generations ago, and like what that can mean for people's humanity generationally down the line. I know, talking about this, that I've jumped so much around, and I know that and this is probably too long, and like it doesn't always make sense just because I jump around so much. Like I know that, so I don't know. I guess I just make these like to try and really help myself think through things, but like hopefully if anyone sees this, like to remind them that, you know, if you have these thoughts too, like you're not alone, and also like whatever thoughts you do have on this, I hope that this can be a place you can share it. So if anyone is watching this and you have any thoughts on this, if you have actual thoughts on like the more objective aspects, or your subjective experience with it, and sharing a bit of your humanity and your pain, and like wanting people to recognize it, because we deserve recognition for our pain too, I hope that this can be a place you can do it, and like I have a submissions page, so you can send it through there, you can comment it, and it can be something I have a website, I can put on a website, or if you just need one person to hear it and recognize the wrong that has been done to you, I'll read it. There's one person who will be in your audience, so yeah, I hope that if anyone is seeing this and they are a part of a community that's being so wronged right now, or has been, or even anyone on like a personal level who's being wronged in their life or has been wronged, like you are so deserving of that or being asked for forgiveness, but more than anything, you're deserving of the acts necessary to even ask someone for forgiveness. Like, that is never unreasonable. You should never feel like you need to just move on and let it go for the sake of others to be at peace, you know? Like, if that's going to happen, then all of us need to feel a sense of peace, and that can't happen unless that is recognized and you're recognized, and there is things done to try and reconcile and rectify what has caused that and to not cause it down the line. You're deserving of that, and you're also, you know, there might be like an idea in the world that to move forward at all, like forgiveness will eventually have to be given. I don't know. But if that's not your generation or you feel like you never can, like, that's for you to decide. And like, whether it's on a family level or like where your family's like, move on from this, like, what are we going to do if you don't move on from this, or a toxic, abusive partner, doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't change the fact that they owe you that. Even if they're trying to get you to move on just to make their life easier, and force you to forget it and make you accept what has happened, it doesn't change that it was wrong and that you have the right to want them to ask for forgiveness and to do the things necessary that are necessary to even like create an atmosphere worthy of forgiveness. And I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to get across, but anyone who's in pain or suffering, I'm so sorry, and I'm so sorry if there's people in your life or institutions that are trying to force you to just give up your humanity for the sake of the world's humanity. Like, we can't have like world peace unless everyone just moves on from what's been done to them. You know, that kind of idea? No, that's so fucked up. And if anyone says that to you, literally fuck them. Like, fuck, what the fuck? Like, no. So yeah, if that's being done to you, or anyone that's trying to brainwash you that way, like, I hope you can just hold on to the part of yourself that knows that it was so wrong and that pain is worthy of recognition and reparations. And they owe you the actions that forgiveness even entail before you can even consider it. And if they aren't even actually really doing that, or if they're only doing it like at institutions on like a structural institutional level, and they're just ignoring the humanity level, like, that's not enough. It'll never be enough. And if they think that that's what'll cause the world to work together, they're wrong. When has it ever? If we just ignore the humanity aspect of existence in favor of just cooperation on a authoritarian level. I'm thinking of Big Brother right now, the book. Yeah, that's all I have to say. If you're in pain, I see you, and if you want to talk about it, and you feel like you need a space to talk about it, and a reason to, whatever the pain is, literally whatever the pain is, can be related to anything I'm talking about now, or just completely unrelated, or your thoughts on it, like, I would be honored to hear it, or see it. There's a bunch of ways you can submit. I'll put it down below, and yeah. Okay. Thank you for watching. If anyone's watching this, maybe it can bring you some comfort or peace of mind. I don't know. Hopefully not the opposite, because it can kind of sound hopeless, but I guess I will talk to you. If there's anyone watching this, I don't know why I talk like this. I guess I'll talk to you in the next video. Okay. Bye.